Welcome and family friends. Today we're looking at another influential Asian American who has impacted Orange County across the decades, as identified by Brian On, a doctoral student doing research from Teachers College at Columbia University. Among those identified include Mr. Alan Wu, Deputy Director of Santa Ana Unidos and the trustee of Colorado College. It's another powerful story of resilience. You're going to hear Alan talk about fleeing for his life from communism in China to the effects of the Chinese Exclusion Act, why there's so many Chinese restaurants, to his work in activism as a social justice agent, and eventually finding a seat at the table to make a difference. Let's hear Mr. Alan Wu's Chinese American story.
Hi, my name is Alan Wu. I'm a retired social worker, community activist, and I ran nonprofits and I had my own companies. And for the last 25 years, I've been working for an anti-poverty program, trying to alleviate hunger and poverty in the low-income communities of Orange County. I guess my first experience should start in China because that's where I was born. I was born in an area of China called Toisan. And Toisan was the area where wherever there was a railroad, they recruited people to work the mines in the railroad. They came from Toisan. They all spoke Cantonese and not that Mandarin language. It's a quiet region made up of farmers, surrounded by mountains and rivers. And it's very family oriented. But the sons of Toisan were recruited to go all over the world. At the time, the motivation for leaving China were twofold. There was a lot of flood that caused famine. There was also unrest because they overthrew the feudal system. And at the time, also, there were political instability within China that caused people to say, okay, let me seek my fortune elsewhere. So usually the first son stayed and the second and third son went elsewhere to seek their fortune. So hence that's how some of my uncles and great-grandfathers came to America to work on the railroad. My father came as a student later, but was on the back of that earlier generation that paved the way by connecting America and building this nation. So my story began when the communists took over China. And at that time, we had a choice. We could either stay in Toisan and had our heads chopped off because all that money from America went back there to buy up things and build homes and all that. So we were own property, and the communists didn't like that. So my mother strapped me on her back and walked me out of China. And my life changed because I was not supposed to be here. On the banks of the Pearl River across from Hong Kong, the communist soldier caught up with us. Our servants have abandoned us, and there was this young mother and me on her back and holding my brother's hand. And they were pointing guns at us. My mother told me the story, but for some reason, they did not shoot. So we swam over, made it over to Hong Kong, where we happened to have property, and then from there, we took the big boat to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, crossed the ocean on the present line to America. And we lived in Chinatown like most people. And you might wonder, well, why did we settle in Chinatown? Well, we got to remember that California was active in promoting the Chinese Exclusion Act. And that was the first time that a national legislation was aimed specifically at an ethnic minority group. And what it did was, and you might wonder why there's so many Chinese restaurants, and why so many Hollywood movies showed us as servants. Well, because the Chinese Exclusion Act made it so that you cannot have any other kind of jobs other than being laborers, cooks, or houseboys. And at the same time, it also excluded from bringing over women. So that's the early day of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we couldn't live anywhere else, so we had to live somewhere. So we created these Chinatown. And in this city, in 1901, May 25th, the city council, it wasn't even a city council then, they saw themselves as a corporation. So the president of the board of trustee and the trustees passed a proclamation to burn down Chinatown. Then they directed the fire marshal to set fire to it. So the reporter reported there was an abundance of kerosene, and for some reason it ignited, and Chinatown was gone. That sticks in my mind of today that connects with the anti-hate environment, that violence and fear is used to control us, is that they eliminate us out of fear rather than seeking and realizing that we're good neighbors, we're nation builders, we're workers, we're family oriented, we have a rich culture that goes back centuries. But because of this one law, we're kind of viewed differently as a suspect. I am today leading a committee to not commemorate the burning down of Chinatown, but to commemorate the spirits of those early Chinese pioneers in Chinatown. So I got businessmen in the downtown area now to create a monument. Councilman Hernandez, one of my mentees, is going to name the district after Chinatown. So we can't take things that impact our lives and transform them, but we can't sit passively and just ignore that these things are happening to us. When we left Chinatown, when we were living in Chinatown, I lived in a house that was provided by the Wu Family Association. It was just an apartment. My grandfather, my dad, and my mom was there, and my brother, because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, was left in Hong Kong with my grandparents. There was in the bathroom a secret passage or the tunnel, and the tunnel led to the hillside because we were living on Hill Street up on the hill, which used to be the rich folks in LA in the early days. Then we moved in. But there was this tunnel, and when I was bad, they kind of sent me in there. But then when I explored it, I found out it led to the outside. I didn't know what that secret room was and tunnel. I found out years later the reason we had that was when the white folks came to beat us up, burn us out. That was our escape route. So that stuck in my mind, and it connected my experience here in Santa Ana. So when we moved out, we decided to move out to the suburbs, which was South Central LA. I went to Manual Arts High School where 99% of my classmates were black. Then there was some Mexican American, Japanese American, and a few of us Chinese, and two Koreans. But that was a really good experience for me because I didn't know any better. I thought the African American students were Americans, and that was my culture that I adopted, was this, black culture of understanding things. We adopted their music. We adopted their way of talking. Which still makes it very difficult for me to speak English because I speak with a South Central accent. But also the sense of where they came from the South, and coming up from slavery, you begin to get a little taste of it as you talk to them about that. And our culture was so different, our food smelled so different for them that they wanted to learn from us. So you became friends. And you start realizing that, these teachers don't look like us. They were white, but at the same time, there were more of them outside our bubble. But they also were the ones that were lifting us up. Manuard was kind of unique because although it had a high concentration of African Americans, and it was not too far from where the Watts riot happened, it was close to USC. So we had a lot of really innovative, driven teachers that wanted to teach. And they taught us in a way to say, we know that you don't have the opportunity to experience the life as we have it, but I'm going to make sure that you will be able to go to college and you will be able to get your education. And then what you do after that, Mr. Wu, is up to you. So with that, I think that's why we had a high percentage of classmates that went to USC, that went to Dartmouth, that went to Carleton, that went to Harvard and Yale and all these schools. I went to Carlisle College, where Ken and Noe is coming from, because I wanted a safe place to be from the atomic bomb, because I went through the childhood of hiding under my desk and learning to protect myself from the atomic bomb. Little did I know it's dirt on the list to be bombed because you got NORAD, Fort Carson, and the Air Force Academy. So there I was flying into Colorado Springs and into a cow pasture and waiting to get a ride to Colorado College, which I didn't know it was there. I didn't know how to get there. There was a man that said, sit over there. And I sat there and sat there and sat there all night. And that was my introduction to racism in Colorado Springs. But when I got to campus, I was meeting kids from all over. And that lifted me up again. I was just another student now finding my way. Although there was only about 10 Asian Americans at the time. 2 of them were from Hawaii. So, and they lived a very multicultural kind of life. There was 4 of the cutest girls from Denver who were Japanese American, so we never had a chance to date them at all. So, but anyway, what started my activism there was really not Asian American affair. It was there was a raging war in Vietnam at the time, and got involved with the anti-war movement and the student movement. And Colorado kind of shaped us in that way because it's a very excellent liberal arts college. What they try to do is they taught us to think and to seek the truth and to connect the dots, and to use our own experience. So my experience was different from most of my classmates. In fact, I challenged my professor Hochman, and I debated with him about that the United States should not have dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They took a vote, and I was the only one that said they shouldn't. No, I think there was a couple of people that had convinced otherwise. But hence, my understanding of history became different because I also saw that there were reasons why Imperial Japan let them to be involved. We cut off the oil from Burma to them as well. But then over time, I realized that war was not caused by people. They're caused by politicians and economic interests. And then that started percolating through most of my life, that I started realizing that war, no one will learn from that. Oppression, only people who want to use government to gain wealth use it to control people. So at Colorado College, most of my classmates were really rich. One guy owned downtown Texas, another guy owned a ranch that goes through 4 states, But there were also regular kids like me. They came from working families, but we had the opportunity to get educated. And I think that's the key for most of us that are speaking to this conference now, is that education is transformative. But also you need to embrace the experience of the students that you see and you hear, and then you lift them up and you give them an opportunity to think for themselves and to use that experience to shape the world and their future. And so when I went back to LA, the activism in LA was percolating. It was in the early infancy. There was not very many. One of my first job was to work for the Inglewood Night Neighborhood Housing Services. The national organization that started these neighborhood housing services across the country to revitalize older neighborhoods would run out of a Washington, D.C. Organization that's funded directly by Congress that involved the lenders and the bankers in the city and the residents. They didn't want me because I was not black, working in a black community. But the residents of the community said, we want this guy. And then the organizers said, well, he's not black. And then they said, well, we trust him. He's black enough for us, you know. And so that led me to work in a black community, working with black leaders. And it was not my experience, you know, although I have exposure to it, going to school at Manual and growing up in South Central LA. But I knew at the same time I was not black, but I had to use that experience to help them. So that was a very good experience. Then I went to work for United Way, which shaped me in a different way. There, I was with an organization that can anytime call on the CEO of different businesses, can call on the political leaders of Los Angeles. And for a young man to have that much access to community leaders, you kind of go, wow. You mean I could just walk in the door of the Jonathan Club? Can I walk, you know, knock on the door of a CEO? Wow. You know, and I was deadly afraid because I never had that exposure. But what I had was Dr. Jack Fujimoto, who was the president of West LA College, Colonel Young Kim, Frank Watasi, the owner of Yum Yum Donuts, Lily Lee, Rose Ochi, tons of other Asian Americans that were there to mentor me, support me, to talk to me when I have questions, to encourage me when I was too afraid to walk into a room, to help me find my own voice. And without that support, you know, it's just difficult for you to see yourself as being able to create change. And then when I came to Orange County, I followed the footsteps of Ken Inoue and others, and it wasn't for them, you know, we would never felt that things would be possible. And then one day I got knocked on the door by a young spunky researcher that I knew when I was working for the Cambodian community in Long Beach by the name of Marianne Fu. And she was like an intern at the time, and she was still going through school at UCI, but she was spunky. She dared to want to start an organization, so she asked Ken and Mike and I to help her. And that became the Orange County Asian and Pacific Islander Community Alliance, OCAPICA. And it was great because at the time, the county was trying to eliminate programs that served the Vietnamese refugee population. It also didn't see a need to have Asian organizations be funded to serve the Asian community. They were not aware of our needs. They were not aware of our culture. They were not aware of our experience. So that had to be educated. And the key role that OCAPICA played was it could do research. It had researchers on the board that could collect the data and the information and say, well, you want to know why we are asking for this? Here it is. Here's our educational needs. Here's our political needs. Here's our equity needs. Here's our social needs. And that starts the conversation. Say, oh, we didn't know. Okay, well, now you know. What are we going to do about it and how we can implement some things to resolve some of these issues. So I think that was a very key turning point. And today there are probably about 30 to 40 organizations that are run by Asian Pacific Islanders. Back then, there was only a few of us. What does that say for us? Well, we're the third largest Asian and Pacific American community in the United States. That brings with it a lot of responsibility. That's 600,000 people, 19,000 Asian Pacific Islanders, and we're not the same. We're made up of Cambodians, Vietnamese, Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, American, Guam, Tongan, Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian, and their experiences are all different. And Filipinos, we're different, but we're lumped together under this category. So that gives us an ability to unite, to work together, support an issue. America did us a favor by some leader calling this kung flu, and with his rhetoric fuel people towards hate against the Asian American community, which resulted in violence. He did us a favor. He did us a favor by this. We didn't become afraid. We decided to unite. We decided to organize. We decided to empower ourselves. We wasn't going to hide in the shadow. We wasn't going to keep our head down. The lesson learned from that is that that's what my mother told me to do when I became active in the community. She said, Alan, be quiet. Keep your head down. Just work hard and keep your head down because they'll send you back to China. I said, send me back there. I'll fight my way back. And that's a different attitude. And then around the time of her death, she said, I didn't understand that about you. My generation didn't have a rule book. We didn't understand how your generation felt. But now I understand. And I'm glad that you stood up. Because if you don't stood up, we would still be suffering the same fate from the Chinese Exclusion Act. So I didn't do that for glory. I didn't do that for name recognition. I just felt that I didn't want to be hurt. I didn't want to see my children hurt. I didn't want to see my family hurt. I didn't want to see my neighbors and friends hurt. I don't want to see other Asian and Pacific Islander Americans hurt. And they didn't want to be hurt. So we found our voice in terms of working together, and we created the institutions that we needed. We crafted the laws that needed to change. We elected people, responsible people who could make change, and we held them accountable to make sure that they stay true to their community. Did that mean they have to be Asian or Pacific Islander American for us to support them? No. We found allies. We could not have done this alone. We found Jewish allies. We found black allies. We found Latino allies. We found white allies. We found friends, period. That's not a color. Friends is the kind of people we embrace because they understand our need and was willing to help. And that's the key. And I think we could transform this world to remove from hate to a more loving and compassionate community if we begin to start seeing each other not by our labels, but by the fact that we are human beings. And in the humanity, we have more commonality than we do hate. And that's a lesson I learned by engaging with Ken at the Orange County Human Relations. There was an incident where because a man could not speak English, he was graced with 40-some bullets in his car, shot to death. And one of the leaders from the Orange County Human Relations brought that car to the spot where he was shot, and he got us all to hug each other. That was a way of healing, because when these incidents of hate happen, there's two things that we need to do. We need to heal, and sometimes people don't understand that. All we're doing is healing. We're taking the opportunity to cry. After we're done crying, now we're going to look at what led to this, and how can we prevent this from happening again. So if you're looking at what it is that motivates us, what it is that shapes our thinking, you're going to have to look at what our culture brings. We believe in family. We believe in cooperation. We believe in hard work. We believe in good education. And that should be normal. We should all think about those things. But we have something else. We also have experienced hate. We have experienced prejudice. And rather than hating back, we use that experience. We internalize it. We take all that trauma and pain and we become resilient. We rise above that and do not let those experiences define who we are. We want you to know who we are by our action. We are nation builders. We're your neighbors. We're your friends. We're not here to hurt you. So don't hurt us. We hit back. And that sums up why I think that what we about and how we have become who we are in terms of community leaders and the other leaders that are now running. I'm so proud that when that anti-hate started percolating, all these women start running. And I think for our future, we ought to let the women run for a while, things, because we sure made a mess of it as men. There's something culturally about women that embraces cooperation, that embraces compassion, that looks to a more loving and just society. So we have some great leaders out there like Tammy Kim, and so many others that got elected during this period that I am so proud to work with. A group of women started Asian American in Action, and they're a strong voice. They're a strong voice out there. In the Vietnamese community, we have Viet Rise, which is a young Vietnamese American now speaking up, and they found their voice in terms of addressing issues of equity in the Vietnamese American community. So that's my story. I hope you were entertained.
You didn't mention at all, though, your involvement with the Latino community.
Oh yeah, the thing with the Latino community is that, as Ken stated, many of us are marrying outside of our culture. I married a Chicana woman who I met in an elevator at a housing convention. She was trying to save her neighborhood from the city tearing it down to build the civic center. And she was trying to improve her neighborhood by getting a city loan to rehab her house. And so when I met her, I became involved with her organization that she was president of, and that was the Santa Ana Neighborhood Organization, which is a Alinsky trained group that are comprised of Jesuit organizers that were teaching 13 neighborhoods in Santa Ana to empower low-income barrio neighborhoods. And we have great successes in organizing against issues with the police and issue of equity and discrimination in school and in housing. The experience from that kind of showed me that the commonality of oppression is that you have to involve people who are oppressed to take charge of their own life and to participate and be actors in change. On the other hand, also because she was my boss, there's harassment there. But that now Santa Ana went from 13 neighborhood associations that were partisano to now 84. That's progress and change. And now we have a council that's very progressive, but also very attentive to hearing the community and providing, listening to community input. And we go from that, from an all-white council to now a largely Latino and Asian council, which shows some growth and change here in the city of Santa Ana. And to me, I don't need to be Cambodian to work in a Cambodian community. I don't need to be Japanese American to run a Japanese American organization. I don't need to be a Black American to work in a Black neighborhood. I don't need to be Latino. I just have to respect who they are and their culture. And I remember one time I had to, before an audience of older Vietnamese Americans who came over as refugees and who was in the military. I said, I had to tell you guys, I was a anti-war protester, so don't hold it against me. And so what they said, oh, we couldn't give you a free pass, Alan. We know about you. and that kind of led me also to realize that humor is another way of building bridges between different conflicting ways that people think just because of their own experiences. So you can't let those conflicting and contrasting view take a hold of everything. You have to find commonality to build bridges and a common cause. And I think that whether I work sitting at the table or from outside, and now as an establishment, because now I'm a city planning commissioner, and I've been appointed to different things before, having at the city table just gives me an opportunity to take the voices that I hear in the community and share them with the other decision makers so we have an opportunity to affect change.